Hello everyone. Today, Biker Justice Analyst bring you a story full of humanity and compassion. Enjoy listening.
Hell's Angel left a $0 tip. What the single mom waitress found under his plate changed everything. The morning sun filtered through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Maggie Reynolds adjusted her apron and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, her movements automatic after years of the same routine. The familiar scent of coffee and bacon filled the air as she moved between tables, wiping them down with practiced efficiency. Her thoughts drifted to Eli, as they often did during her morning shifts. She'd left him at Mrs. Parker's house next door, still sleepy but excited about the science project he'd been working on. A small smile touched her lips as she remembered his enthusiasm while explaining all about plant growth and sunlight. "Mom, it's like magic," he had said, his eyes sparkling. "The plants know exactly which way to grow." Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. The bell above the door chimed, pulling her from her thoughts. Maggie looked up, and her hand froze mid-wipe on the table she was cleaning. A large man stood in the doorway, his presence seeming to fill the entire entrance. Thick tattoos covered his muscular arms, disappearing beneath the sleeves of his black t-shirt. His beard was full and dark, and there was something about his eyes, sharp and observant, that made her throat go dry. The usual morning chatter in the diner dimmed to hushed whispers. Even Tom, the cook who'd been loudly complaining about the griddle, fell silent. The man's heavy boots thudded against the floor as he made his way to the counter, each step deliberate and measured. Maggie's heart hammered in her chest as she set down her cleaning cloth. She'd dealt with all sorts of customers over the years: rowdy teenagers, grumpy seniors, rushed business people. But something about this man was different. It wasn't just his intimidating appearance. There was an intensity about him that made her nervous. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her notepad and pen, forcing her hands to remain steady. The man had settled onto one of the counter stools, his large frame making it look almost comically small. The other customers at the counter had subtly shifted away, leaving an empty seat on either side of him. "Good morning," Maggie said, proud that her voice remained level despite her nerves. She placed a menu in front of him, careful to maintain a professional smile. "Can I get you started with some coffee?" The man's eyes met hers, and Maggie felt rooted to the spot. There was something in his gaze, something searching and almost familiar, that made her uncomfortable. He didn't speak immediately, and the silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Finally, he gave a slight nod, his expression remaining unreadable. Maggie turned to grab the coffee pot, grateful for the chance to break eye contact. She could feel his gaze following her movements as she poured the steaming liquid into a white ceramic mug. "Would you like to take a look at the menu?" she asked, setting the coffee down in front of him. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed it on the counter. The man's fingers wrapped around the mug, his knuckles marked with old scars. He studied her face for a moment longer, and Maggie felt the weight of his scrutiny like a physical thing. The atmosphere in the diner remained tense, other customers stealing furtive glances in their direction. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and gravelly. "Just eggs and toast." He paused, then added, "Please." The polite addition somehow made Maggie more uneasy rather than less. She nodded, jotting down his order with slightly shaky handwriting, all too aware of his continued attention. Maggie busied herself with other customers while keeping one eye on the mysterious man at the counter. He hunched over his plate, methodically cutting his eggs into precise squares before eating them. His movements were controlled, deliberate, like someone used to being watched. From this angle, she could better study the artwork that covered his arms. The tattoos weren't the typical flash art she'd seen on other customers. These were detailed pieces that told stories. A fierce eagle spread its wings across his right bicep, while what looked like a chain wrapped around his left forearm. Between them, faded words and dates peeked through, some too worn to read. His leather vest bore patches she recognized from news reports about motorcycle gangs. The thought made her shoulders tense. She'd seen enough tough customers come through the diner's doors, but there was something different about this one. A hardness in his eyes that spoke of experiences she couldn't begin to imagine. The morning light caught the silver in his beard and the creases around his eyes. Weather-worn lines etched deep paths across his face like a map of hard years lived on the road. His hands, wrapped around the coffee mug, bore countless small scars and calluses, working hands that had seen their share of trouble. Other customers gave him a wide berth as they paid their bills and left. Even Jerry, the regular who always had a joke for everyone, hurried past without his usual friendly banter. The man seemed unbothered by the attention, or lack thereof, focused entirely on his simple breakfast, as if it were the most important task in the world. Maggie refilled coffee cups and delivered plates of pancakes and hash browns to other tables, all while aware of his presence like a weight in the room. The usual morning chatter had dulled to murmurs, as if everyone was afraid to speak too loudly. When he finished eating, he pushed his plate away with the same deliberate movement that marked all his actions. He didn't look up or try to catch her eye for the check. Instead, he pulled out a worn leather wallet and examined the bill that Maggie had placed face down beside his plate earlier. Maggie watched from the corner of her eye as he counted out exact change, laying the bills flat on the table with precision. Then, without a word or backward glance, he stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet diner. The bell above the door chimed his exit, and suddenly the room seemed to exhale. Walking over to clear his place, Maggie felt the familiar weight of disappointment settle in her chest as she picked up the bill. No tip. She'd done everything right, kept his coffee full, brought his food quickly, been polite despite her nerves. But the tip line remained empty, just like her tip jar had been more often than not lately. She gathered the plates, trying not to let it bother her. The morning light that had seemed so promising earlier now felt harsh and unforgiving. Her feet already ached, and she still had hours to go before her shift ended. Some days, it felt like kindness was as rare in the diner as good tips. Maggie stacked the dirty plates, her movements automatic after years of practice. The ceramic clinked together as she gathered them, creating a small tower of maple syrup-stained dishes. As she lifted the last plate, something caught her eye. A piece of white paper, carefully folded, sitting innocently on the worn counter surface. She paused, plates balanced in one hand. Strange. Customers sometimes left notes, usually complaints about the food or service, but this man hadn't seemed the type. The paper was crisp and clean, folded with the same precise care she'd noticed in his other movements. Another complaint, she muttered, trying to squash her curiosity, but her free hand reached for it anyway, fingers closing around the cool paper. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she unfolded it, revealing neat block letters that made her breath catch. Look under the plate. Maggie glanced around the diner. The morning rush had thinned out, leaving only a few regulars nursing their coffee cups. None of them paid her any attention. Her gaze drifted to the window, but the mysterious man was long gone, probably miles away on whatever road he'd come from. She set down her stack of dishes, hands trembling slightly. The plate sat there, ordinary and white, hiding whatever secret lay beneath. Part of her wanted to ignore the note, to just clear the table and move on with her day. Notes under plates rarely led to anything good. But something about those carefully printed words tugged at her. The man's deliberate movements, his quiet intensity, none of it fitted with the idea of a mean-spirited prank. Taking a deep breath, Maggie reached for the plate. It felt heavier than usual, or maybe that was just her imagination playing tricks on her. She lifted it slowly, revealing what lay beneath. A plain white envelope sat on the counter, thick enough to make her heart skip a beat. No name, no writing on the outside. Just like the note, it was crisp and clean, as if it had been prepared specifically for this moment. With shaking fingers, Maggie picked up the envelope. It had weight to it, more than paper should. The seal came apart easily under her fingers, and she reached inside. Her breath caught in her throat. Money. Not just a few bills, but stack after stack of crisp 20s and 50s. She quickly pressed the envelope against her apron, glancing around nervously to make sure no one had noticed. Finding a quiet corner by the coffee station, Maggie quickly counted the money. $50. 100. 500. Her eyes grew wider with each stack. When she finished counting, she had to lean against the counter for support. $5,000. The amount hit her like a physical force. $5,000! More than a month's worth of tips. More than 2 months' rent. More money than she'd held in her hands at once in years. She stared at the envelope, her mind spinning with questions. Why would he leave so much? Was it a mistake? But no. The note proved it was intentional. He'd meant for her to find this. But why? Why would a rough-looking stranger leave a tip that could change someone's life? The money felt warm in her hands, full of possibility and terror all at once. $5,000 left by a man who hadn't spoken a word to her beyond his order, who'd seemed so intimidating that other customers had avoided him. A man who'd walked away without a backward glance, leaving behind enough money to make her hands shake and her heart race with disbelief. The envelope felt heavy in Maggie's apron pocket as she made her way to the back of the diner. Her shoes squeaked against the worn linoleum floor, each step echoing her racing thoughts. $5,000. The amount kept repeating in her head like a broken record. She found Vince in his usual spot, hunched over paperwork at the small desk squeezed between boxes of supplies. The office, if you could call it that, was barely bigger than a closet. A single bulb cast harsh shadows across his weathered face. "Vince?" Her voice came out softer than intended. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" He looked up, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "Something wrong with table 6 again?" "No, it's..." Maggie glanced over her shoulder, making sure none of the other servers were within earshot. "That man who was here earlier. The one with all the tattoos." Vince's expression hardened. "What about him? He give you trouble?" "Not exactly." Maggie pulled the envelope from her pocket, her fingers trembling slightly. "He left this, under his plate." She placed the envelope on Vince's desk, watching as he opened it. His eyes widened for a moment before narrowing to suspicious slits. $5,000, she said, the words still feeling strange on her tongue. "I found a note telling me to look under the plate." Vince leafed through the bills, his frown deepening with each stack. "And he just left? Didn't say anything?" "Nothing. Just ate his breakfast and walked out." "Humph." Vince pushed his glasses up his nose. "Nobody leaves this kind of money without wanting something in return. Nobody." "But what could he want? He didn't even talk to me beyond ordering." "That's how they operate, these types." Vince leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking under his weight. "They show up looking tough, throwing money around like it means nothing. Next thing you know, they're asking for favors. Dangerous favors. Maggie wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the kitchen's heat. You think I should be worried? I think you should be smart. Vince's voice took on the gruff, paternal tone he used when giving advice. Don't go looking for explanations. Don't try to find him. Just take the money and keep your head down. But what if... No what-ifs. He held up a calloused hand. Listen, Maggie. I've been running this place for 30 years. I've seen all kinds come through those doors. Men like that? He shook his head. They're trouble, plain and simple. Maggie's fingers found the edge of her apron, twisting the fabric. So you think I should keep it? I think you should be grateful for the gift and leave it at that. Don't get too attached to the idea of easy money. He pushed the envelope back across the desk. And Maggie, be careful. Sometimes kindness comes with strings attached. She picked up the envelope, its weight feeling different now, heavier with warning than possibility. Her stomach churned with uncertainty as she tucked it back into her pocket. Thanks, Vince, she said quietly, though his words had done little to settle her nerves. Just watch yourself, he replied, already turning back to his paperwork. And don't let your imagination run wild. Sometimes things are better left unquestioned. Maggie nodded, but as she walked back to the front of the diner, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. The money pressed against her leg with each step, a constant reminder of the mysterious stranger and the questions he'd left behind. Maggie's feet ached as she climbed the 3 flights of stairs to their small apartment. The envelope felt like it weighed 100 pounds in her purse, but her spirits lifted when she reached their floor. There, sitting cross-legged by their worn apartment door, was Eli, his backpack beside him and a comic book open on his lap. Mommy. His face lit up like sunshine breaking through clouds. He jumped to his feet, the comic book forgotten as he rushed to wrap his arms around her waist. Hey, sweetie. Maggie hugged him tight, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo and the slight hint of playground dirt that seemed to follow all 8-year-olds. Have you been waiting long? Nope. Mrs. Martinez let me do my homework at her place until she heard you coming up the stairs. Eli pointed to their neighbor's door, where the elderly woman stood smiling. Thank you so much, Maggie called out to Mrs. Martinez, who waved before disappearing back into her apartment. Inside their small home, Maggie dropped her purse on the counter while Eli bounced around her, full of energy despite the late hour. The apartment wasn't much, just a tiny living room that flowed into an even tinier kitchen, 2 small bedrooms, and a bathroom that barely fit both of them at once. But they'd made it home. Can we have mac and cheese tonight? Eli asked, already pulling out a chair at their small kitchen table. I helped Mrs. Martinez water her plants, and she gave me an extra juice box. That was nice of her. Maggie smiled, reaching for the familiar blue box in their cabinet. As she prepared dinner, her hand brushed against her purse, reminding her of the envelope inside. $5,000. Enough to cover 3 months' rent, or buy Eli the new shoes he needed, plus so much more. But something about it still felt wrong. How was school today? She asked, stirring the pasta as it boiled. Eli launched into an elaborate story about his day, complete with hand gestures and sound effects. And then in art class, we made these really cool paintings of our families. I drew you and me, and Mrs. Thompson said mine was really good. Maggie's heart squeezed. That's wonderful, honey. Did you bring it home? It's still drying. I get to take it home tomorrow. He drummed his fingers on the table. Mom? Tommy in my class says everyone has a dad. How come I don't have one? The question hit her like a punch to the gut. Maggie focused on draining the pasta, buying herself time to find the right words. Well, sweetie, every family is different. Some kids have a mom and a dad, some have 2 moms or 2 dads. And some, like you, have just one parent who loves them very much. But where is my dad? Maggie added the cheese powder and milk, stirring carefully. That's complicated, honey. But what matters is that we have each other, right? Eli nodded, though she could see the questions still swimming in his eyes. She served their dinner, watching as he dug in with the enthusiasm only kids could muster for mac and cheese. Her purse sat on the counter, the envelope inside holding promises and potential problems. But looking at Eli, happily twirling his fork through the cheesy pasta, Maggie knew she had to be careful. Whatever that money meant, whatever strings might be attached, she had to protect him. She'd worked too hard to give him a stable life to risk it all now. "Can we watch a cartoon before bed?" Eli asked through a mouthful of pasta. "Just one," Maggie agreed, reaching across to wipe a spot of cheese from his chin. "And only after you finish your dinner." The soft glow of Eli's nightlight cast gentle shadows on the walls as Maggie tucked his favorite dinosaur print blanket around him. His eyelids were already heavy, fighting the losing battle against sleep that children wage every night. "Did you brush your teeth?" Maggie asked, smoothing his dark hair away from his forehead. "Mm-hmm," Eli mumbled, snuggling deeper into his pillow. "Can you leave the door open a little?" "Of course, sweetie." Maggie leaned down to kiss his forehead. "Sweet dreams." She was just about to crack the door when 3 heavy knocks echoed through their small apartment. The sound seemed to bounce off the walls, making her jump. Eli stirred in his bed but didn't wake. Maggie's heart began to race. It was nearly 9 o'clock, too late for casual visitors. Oi, Martinez never came by this late, and they rarely got other visitors. Through the peephole, she saw a large figure filling the narrow view. Another knock, softer this time. With trembling fingers, Maggie slid the chain lock into place before opening the door as far as it would allow. Her breath caught in her throat. There, illuminated by the harsh hallway lights, stood the man from the diner. Up close, his presence was even more intimidating. The tattoos that covered his arms seemed to shift in the fluorescent lighting, telling stories she couldn't quite read. "Maggie," he said, his voice surprisingly soft for such a large man. "I need to talk to you." She gripped the doorframe tighter. "How do you know my name? Who are you?" "My name is Jake Bennett." He shifted his weight, and Maggie noticed he was holding something in his hands. An old photograph. "I've been looking for you for a long time." "Looking for me? Why?" Jake held up the photograph. Even through the crack in the door, Maggie recognized it. Herself, 8 years younger, sitting on a motorcycle and laughing. Her hair was longer then, and her face less lined with worry. She remembered that day, remembered the man who had taken that picture. But it couldn't be. "Because," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm Eli's father." The words hit Maggie like a physical blow. She stared at him, really looking now, at the shape of his jaw, the set of his eyes. Features she saw every day in her son's face. "That's impossible," she whispered. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't. The timing was right. The resemblance was there. But the Jake she had known wasn't covered in tattoos, didn't have that hardness in his eyes. "I know it's a shock," Jake said, "but I've spent years trying to find you both. I didn't know about Eli, not until after—" He trailed off, swallowing hard. "I want to make things right, Maggie. I need to." Maggie's mind raced. The money at the diner. The way he'd been watching her. It all made a terrible kind of sense now. She felt dizzy, her grip on the doorframe the only thing keeping her steady. "How did you find us?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "It wasn't easy," Jake admitted. but I never stopped looking. I've changed, Maggie. I'm not the same person I was back then. I just want a chance to explain, to make amends for everything." Maggie's hand trembled as she closed the door, unlatched the chain, and reopened it fully. Jake's massive frame seemed to fill the entire doorway of her small apartment. She gestured for him to enter, keeping her movements stiff and mechanical. "Keep your voice down," she whispered. "Eli's trying to sleep." Jake nodded, stepping inside with surprising quietness for such a large man. In the better light of her living room, Maggie could see the years etched on his face, the gray threading through his beard. He looked older, harder, but his eyes held the same intensity she remembered from years ago. "You never told me," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. "All these years, and I never knew I had a son." Maggie crossed her arms, creating a barrier between them. "You disappeared, Jake. One day you were there, and the next." She swallowed hard, old pain rising in her throat. "By the time I found out I was pregnant, you were long gone." "I got caught up in some bad stuff back then," Jake admitted, running a hand through his beard. "The gang, the lifestyle. It was all I knew. But if I'd known about Eli..." His voice cracked slightly. "I would have stayed. I would have tried to be better." "Would you?" Maggie's voice was sharp, though still quiet. "The Jake I knew wasn't exactly father material. You were running with the Hell's Angels, living wild and dangerous. What kind of life would that have been for a baby?" Jake's shoulders slumped. "You're right, I wasn't ready then. But I've changed, Maggie. I got out of that life. I've built something legitimate, something good." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "I own an auto repair shop now. 3 of them, actually." Maggie glanced at the card, but didn't take it. "So, the money at the diner..." "Was me trying to help," Jake finished. "I've been watching you both for a while, trying to find the right way to approach you. I know it wasn't the best way, but I needed to do something." "You were spying on us?" Maggie's voice rose slightly before she caught herself. "Not spying, protecting, making sure you were okay." Jake's eyes softened. "He looks just like you know. Except for the eyes. Those are mine." Maggie felt tears threatening. It was true. Eli had Jake's eyes, those same intense dark eyes that could see right through you. How many times had she looked at her son and seen hints of his father? "I'm sorry, Maggie," Jake said, his voice thick with regret. "I'm sorry for everything, for leaving, for not being there, for all the years I missed. I want to make it right. I need to make it right." Maggie sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know if that's possible, Jake. Just give me a chance to try?" He remained standing, keeping his distance, respecting her space. "Let me explain everything." After a long moment, Maggie nodded slowly. "Okay, we can talk." A small sound from the hallway made them both turn. Eli stood in his dinosaur pajamas, his dark eyes wide as they moved from his mother to Jake. His small voice pierced the tension in the room. "Mommy," he whispered. "Is that my daddy?" The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. Maggie looked at her son, then at Jake, seeing the unmistakable resemblance between them. The truth she'd kept hidden for 8 years stood before her, impossible to deny any longer. Eli's small feet padded back to his bedroom after Maggie gently insisted he try to get some sleep. The silence that followed felt heavy, loaded with years of unspoken words. Maggie sat rigid on the worn couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Jake settled into the armchair across from her, his large frame making the furniture seem smaller. "I need to tell you everything, Maggie. You deserve the truth." 8 years of truth, she said, her voice tight. "Start talking." Jake leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Back then, I was running with the Devil's Hand MC. Started as just hanging around the clubhouse, fixing bikes. But it got darker. He rubbed his face, the tattoos on his forearms shifting in the dim light. Drug running, protection rackets, territory fights. I was young and stupid, thought it made me somebody. Maggie's jaw clenched. While I was working 2 jobs, pregnant and scared? I didn't know. Jake's voice cracked. I swear, Maggie, if I'd known about Eli... You would have what? Maggie cut in, her voice rising before she remembered to keep it down. Brought a baby into that life, around criminals and violence? Jake shook his head. You're right. I was poisoned back then. But finding out about Eli changed everything. He pulled out his wallet, retrieving a worn photograph. 3 years ago, I saw you both at the park. Eli was playing on the swings, and you were watching him. Something about the way he smiled. His voice grew rough. I knew he was mine. So you've been watching us for 3 years? Maggie's anger flared. While I struggled to make rent? While I skipped meals so Eli could eat? I started cleaning up my life that day, Jake insisted. Got out of the gang, used my savings to open the first auto shop. Built it legitimate, worked honest hours. He leaned forward. I've been trying to help. The anonymous donations to Eli's school fund, the mysterious rent payments. That was you? Maggie's eyes widened, then narrowed. You had no right. I had every right, Jake's voice rose slightly. He's my son. A son you abandoned, Maggie shot back, tears burning in her eyes. Do you know what it's like to hold your crying baby at night alone? To watch him take his first steps with no one to share it with? To see him looking at other kids with their dads and know you can't give him that? Jake's face crumpled. I'm trying to make it right, Maggie. I've changed. I want to be there for him now. Now? Maggie laughed bitterly. Now that the hard part's over? Now that I've done all the heavy lifting? I know I don't deserve forgiveness, Jake said quietly. But Eli deserves a father. Let me try to be that for him. Maggie stood up, pacing the small living room. How do I know this isn't just another game? That you won't disappear again when things get tough? Because I love him, Jake said simply. I've loved him since the moment I saw him on those swings, and I never stopped loving you. Maggie! She froze, her back to him. Don't. You lost the right to say that a long time ago. I mean it, Jake insisted, rising from his chair. I'm not the same man who left you. I want to prove it to you both. Maggie turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. Prove what? That you can be trusted? That you can be a father? Where were you when he needed you? Maggie stared at the envelope in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a receipt for this month's rent payment, already taken care of. She'd been finding things like this more and more lately. First, it was the overdue electric bill that mysteriously disappeared. Then the grocery store called about a credit on her account. At the kitchen table, she spread out all the evidence: receipts, bank statements, and notification letters. The pattern was clear. Someone had been helping them for months, maybe even years. Her mind kept circling back to Jake. But why wouldn't he just say something? Eli bounded into the kitchen, backpack slung over his shoulder. Mom, can we get new shoes? Mine are getting small. Maggie's heart squeezed. She'd been worrying about how to afford new shoes. We'll figure something out, sweetie. Later that afternoon, while Eli was at school, Maggie walked into the shoe store where she'd been eyeing a pair for him. The saleswoman smiled brightly. Mrs. Reynolds, your order is ready. My order? Maggie's confusion must have shown on her face. Yes, the children's sneakers. The woman pulled out a box containing exactly the shoes Eli needed. They've already been paid for. Maggie's hands clenched into fists. This was too much. She pulled out her phone and called Jake. 20 minutes later, they sat in a quiet corner of the local park. Jake's massive frame seemed out of place on the small bench, his tattooed arms crossed over his chest. "How long?" Maggie demanded. "How long have you been doing this?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. "About 3 years, since I first saw you both at the park." "Why didn't you just tell me?" Her voice cracked with emotion. "Why all the secrecy? Would you have accepted my help if I'd offered it directly?" Jake's eyes met hers, knowing the answer. Maggie looked away. "That should have been my choice to make." "I know." Jake's voice was soft. "But I couldn't just do nothing. Every time I saw you struggling—" He paused, collecting his thoughts. "The first time I noticed Eli's coat was too small, I wanted to buy him a new one. But I knew I had no right to walk into your lives then. I wasn't ready. Wasn't the man you both deserved. So you played guardian angel instead." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. "I did what I could from a distance." Jake ran a hand through his beard. "The rent payments, the bills, the school supplies, it was the least I could do after everything I put you through." Maggie's anger flared. "You had no right to spy on us like that, to make decisions about our lives without my knowledge." "You're right," Jake admitted. "But seeing you work yourself to exhaustion, watching Eli grow up without—" He trailed off, his remorse evident in every line of his face. "I couldn't stand by and do nothing." "And now?" Maggie challenged. "Now that you've confessed, what do you expect?" "Nothing." Jake's response was immediate. "I don't expect forgiveness or gratitude. I just want you to know that everything I did, every donation, every payment, it wasn't about control or guilt. It was about trying to make things a little easier for you both, even if I didn't deserve to be in your lives." Jake reached into his leather jacket and pulled out an envelope, similar to the one he'd left at the diner. "I want to help you start fresh," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "No strings attached." Maggie stared at the envelope he held out to her, her throat tightening. The park around them seemed too quiet now, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the ground. $5,000, Jake continued. "You could use it for whatever you need. Maybe start that small business you always dreamed about. The one you mentioned years ago. The bakery?" Maggie's eyes widened. She hadn't thought about that dream in years, hadn't dared to. Between raising Eli and keeping food on the table, such thoughts seemed like luxuries she couldn't afford. "I've done well for myself," Jake explained, still holding out the envelope. "Made some smart investments, turned my life around. This money, it's clean, and it's the least I can do after everything." Maggie wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the familiar weight of pride and independence pressing against her chest. "I don't need your charity, Jake." "It's not charity." He set the envelope on the bench between them. "Think of it as an investment in your future, in Eli's future. Our future was something you should have thought about 8 years ago." The words came out sharper than she intended, but she couldn't help it. The memory of those early days, alone and scared, came rushing back. Jake's shoulders slumped slightly. "You're right. I should have been there. But I'm trying to make things right now." "By throwing money at the problem?" Maggie stood up, needing to move, to put some distance between herself and the envelope that seemed to mock everything she'd worked for. "I've managed just fine on my own. I've kept Eli fed, clothed, and happy without your help." "I know you have," Jake said softly, "and you've done an amazing job. But you shouldn't have to struggle anymore. Let me help ease some of that burden." Maggie turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And then what? I take your money and suddenly everything's okay? All those years of wondering where you were, of explaining to Eli why he didn't have a father like other kids. That just goes away?" "No," Jake admitted. Nothing can make up for that. But this isn't about the past. It's about giving you a chance at something better." Maggie looked at the envelope again, and for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what she could do with that money. The bakery she'd dreamed of, a better apartment, new clothes for Eli. But the cost seemed too high. Not in dollars, but in what it would mean to accept it. "I can't," she said finally, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I won't trade my independence for your guilt money. Eli and I have made it this far on our own." Jake nodded slowly, respecting her decision even as disappointment crossed his face. He picked up the envelope and held it out to her one last time. "The offer stands. If you change your mind—" "I won't." Maggie squared her shoulders, standing straighter. Years of making it on her own had taught her one thing. She was stronger than she thought. "Thank you, but no." The envelope disappeared back into Jake's jacket, but the weight of his offer hung between them like a physical thing, making the park bench feel smaller than ever. The evening crowd at the diner had thinned out, leaving only a few regulars nursing their coffee cups. Maggie wiped down the counter while keeping an eye on Jake, who sat in his usual spot, helping Eli with his math homework. The sight of them together still felt strange, but she couldn't deny the gentle way Jake explained multiplication tables to their son. The bell above the door chimed, and the atmosphere in the diner instantly changed. 3 men in leather jackets stepped inside, their heavy boots echoing against the linoleum floor. Tattoos snaked up their necks, and their faces wore hard expressions that made Maggie's heart skip a beat. "Well, well," the tallest one said, his voice gravelly. "Look who we found." Jake's shoulders tensed. He turned slowly, positioning himself between the men and Eli. "Marcus," he said, his voice low and controlled. "What are you doing here?" Marcus, the leader, stepped forward. His weathered face broke into an unfriendly smile. "That's funny. I was about to ask you the same thing. Playing house instead of handling business?" The other customers sensed trouble. A couple near the door quietly paid their bill and slipped out. Vince emerged from the kitchen, his face tight with concern. "The business is done," Jake said firmly. "I told you that when I left." "Nobody leaves the Brotherhood?" the second man growled. He was shorter, but built like a brick wall. "You know the rules." Maggie's hands trembled as she reached for Eli. "Baby, come here," she whispered. Eli looked confused, but obeyed, sliding off his stool and moving behind the counter with her. "Rules change." Jake stood up, his full height matching Marcus's. "I've changed." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Changed? Into what? A family man?" His eyes flickered to Maggie and Eli. "Don't tell me you're going soft over some waitress and her kid." Jake's fists clenched at his sides. "That's my son you're talking about, and you'd better watch your mouth." "Your son?" The third man spat. "Since when do you care about family? We're your family." "Not anymore." Jake's voice was steel. "I'm done with that life. Done with the violence, the deals, all of it." Marcus stepped closer, his boots squeaking on the freshly mopped floor. "You don't get to decide that. We've got business waiting. Important business. The kind that made you rich in the first place." I said no. Jake didn't back down. "That money came with too high a price. I'm not going back." The tension in the diner crackled like electricity. Maggie held Eli close, feeling his small body trembling against her. She caught Vince's eye, and he nodded slightly, his hand moving towards the phone. "You're making a mistake," Marcus warned. "Nobody walks away from us. Nobody." "I already have." Jake's voice softened as he glanced back at Maggie and Eli. "My loyalty is here now, with my family." The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus's face darkened with anger, and his companions shifted restlessly, hands disappearing beneath their jackets. "This isn't over," Marcus promised, his voice thick with threat. "You know how this works, Jake. You know what happens to people who cross us." Jake stood his ground, but Maggie could see the muscle working in his jaw. "Leave," he said quietly, "and don't come back." The three men lingered for a moment longer, their presence filling the diner with menace. Finally, Marcus turned toward the door, his boots heavy on the floor. "You'll regret this," he called over his shoulder. As the door swung shut behind them, Maggie felt fear settle deep in her stomach. She looked at Jake, still standing rigid and alert, and wondered if letting him into their lives had been a terrible mistake. The diner was closed now, and the last traces of sunlight painted long shadows across the empty tables. Maggie sat alone in a booth, her untouched coffee growing cold. Her hands still trembled slightly as she remembered the menacing presence of Marcus and his men. She couldn't shake the image of Jake standing there, a wall between danger and their son. Their son. The words felt strange even in her thoughts. For 8 years, it had just been her and Eli, and now everything was changing so fast it made her head spin. The cleaning crew had already gone home, leaving behind the comforting smell of pine cleaner and fresh coffee. Vince had offered to stay, but Maggie needed this moment alone to think. She pulled out her phone and looked at the picture Eli had taken yesterday. Jake teaching him how to fix a bike chain, both of their faces lit up with matching grins. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered to the empty diner. On one hand, Jake was trying so hard to be the father Eli deserved. She saw it in the way he listened patiently to Eli's endless stories about school, how he showed up with a new book or toy that was exactly what Eli had mentioned wanting weeks ago. But then there was the other side, the dangerous past that refused to let him go. The door chimed softly, and Maggie looked up to see Eli walking in with Mrs. Peterson, their elderly neighbor who often watched him after school. Her son's face brightened when he saw her. "Mom!" Eli ran over and slid into the booth beside her. "Are you okay? Mrs. Peterson said you needed some quiet time." Maggie pulled him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. "I'm okay, baby. Just thinking about some grown-up stuff." "About Jake?" Eli asked, his voice small but serious. "Yeah," she admitted, running her fingers through his hair. "How do you feel about him, sweetie? Really feel?" Eli was quiet for a moment, playing with the salt shaker on the table. "I like him," he finally said. "He's different from what I imagined a dad would be like, but he's nice to me, and he makes me feel safe." "Safe?" Maggie echoed, thinking about the confrontation earlier. "Yeah," Eli nodded. "Like when Tommy was being mean at school last week, Jake told me about how to handle bullies without fighting. He said sometimes the bravest thing is walking away." Maggie felt her throat tighten. "He told you that?" "Uh-huh. And he said that real strength isn't about being scary or tough. It's about protecting the people you love." Eli looked up at her with those earnest eyes that sometimes seemed too wise for his 8 years. "I think he really loves us, Mom. Can't we give him a chance?" Maggie pulled Eli closer, resting her chin on top of his head. Her son's simple faith made her question her own fears. Yes, Jake's past was dangerous, but wasn't he trying to leave it behind? Wasn't he choosing them over everything else? "You really want him in our lives?" she asked softly. "Yeah," Eli said without hesitation. "I think he needs us too, Mom. Sometimes he looks sad, like he's afraid we'll send him away." Maggie closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten. She thought about Jake standing up to his old gang, declaring his loyalty to them. Maybe Eli was right. Maybe they all needed each other. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to Eli. "One more chance." But even as she said the words, her heart felt heavy with doubt. The morning sun cast gentle shadows through the oak trees as Jake led Maggie and Eli through Riverside Park. The playground equipment gleamed with fresh paint, and children's laughter filled the air. Eli bounced ahead of them, his excitement barely contained. "Can I go on the swings?" he called back, already halfway there. "Hold up, buddy," Jake said, his deep voice softened by affection. "Let's find a good spot for your mom to sit first." Maggie watched as Jake spread out a checkered blanket under a shady tree, carefully smoothing the wrinkles. He'd thought of everything, bringing water bottles, snacks, and even Eli's favorite comic books. It was strange seeing those tattooed hands being so gentle with such ordinary tasks. "All set," Jake announced. "Now you can hit the swings, champ." Eli whooped and took off running. Jake turned to Maggie with a hesitant smile. "Is this okay? I thought some fresh air might do us all good." Maggie nodded, settling onto the blanket. "It's nice," she admitted. "Eli loves the park, but I don't get to bring him as often as I'd like. Usually too tired after work." They watched as Eli pumped his legs on the swing, going higher and higher. Jake's eyes never left their son, his expression a mixture of pride and regret. "He's fearless," he said softly. "Gets that from his father, I suppose," Maggie replied, then bit her lip, surprised by her own words. Jake glanced at her, hope flickering across his face. "I was thinking," he said carefully, "maybe we could make this a regular thing? Sunday mornings in the park?" Before Maggie could answer, Eli's voice rang out. "Dad, watch this!" Jake's face lit up at being called Dad, and he jumped to his feet. "I'm watching, buddy. Show me what you've got." Maggie observed as Jake stood at the bottom of the slide, arms ready to catch Eli if needed. Their son's laughter echoed across the playground as Jake pretended to be knocked over when Eli crashed into him. It was a side of Jake she hadn't expected. Playful, gentle, patient. As the morning wore on, they shared sandwiches and stories. Jake taught Eli how to throw a proper spiral with a football he'd brought along, his instructions clear and encouraging. When Eli struggled, Jake knelt beside him, adjusting his grip with infinite patience. "You're doing great," Jake assured him. "It took me weeks to get it right when I was your age." Watching them together, Maggie felt something shift inside her. The man before her wasn't the same person who'd left her all those years ago. But could she trust this change? The memory of the gang members at the diner still haunted her. Later, as Eli dozed on the blanket, exhausted from play, Maggie made a decision. She needed to protect her son, but she also needed to be smart about it. A lawyer could help her understand her options, help her build a secure future regardless of what happened with Jake. "I need to run some errands tomorrow," she told Jake quietly. "Would you mind watching Eli for an hour?" Jake's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. "Of course," he said. "Whatever you need." Maggie nodded, watching as a butterfly landed on Eli's sleeve. She'd call Sarah Martinez first thing in the morning. She was a family lawyer who sometimes came to the diner. It was time to make sure her son's future was protected, one way or another. Maggie sat across from Linda Peters, a financial advisor at First Street Credit Union. The office was small but welcoming, with potted plants in the corners and diplomas hanging on pale blue walls. Linda adjusted her reading glasses as she reviewed Maggie's financial documents spread across her desk. "So, you have this recent windfall of $5,000, Linda said, tapping her pen against the paperwork. "And you want to make the most of it?" Maggie nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I need to think about Eli's future. College, emergencies, everything I couldn't plan for before." Linda smiled warmly. "Let's break this down into manageable steps. First, tell me about your current debts." Maggie took a deep breath and began listing them. The credit card she'd maxed out when Eli had pneumonia last winter, the small personal loan she'd taken for car repairs, and the remaining balance on some medical bills. As she spoke, Linda made careful notes. "Okay," Linda said, turning her notepad around. "Here's what I suggest. We'll use about half of the money to pay off your high-interest debts. That'll free up about $200 in your monthly budget right away." Relief flooded through Maggie. Just the thought of being free from those monthly payments made her shoulders feel lighter. "With the remaining money," Linda continued, "we can open 2 accounts, a high-yield savings account for emergencies and an education savings account for Eli. Even a small monthly contribution will grow significantly by the time he's ready for college." As Linda walked her through the numbers, Maggie felt a new sense of possibility unfold before her. For the first time in years, she could see beyond just surviving paycheck to paycheck. She could plan, save, dream. "There are also some government programs you might qualify for," Linda added, printing out several information sheets. "And have you considered asking for more hours at the diner? With your debts reduced, you could put that extra income directly into savings." After the meeting, Maggie sat in her car, staring at the folder of paperwork Linda had given her. The $5,000 from Jake had opened doors she thought would stay forever closed. She pulled out her phone, scrolling to Jake's number. Her finger hovered over the call button. She owed him thanks. That much was clear. But the words stuck in her throat as memories of their past surfaced. The nights she'd spent crying, wondering how she'd manage alone. The fear when she first realized she was pregnant. The anger when he'd disappeared without a trace. The phone felt heavy in her hand. Yes, Jake had changed. She'd seen it in how he acted with Eli, in his determination to make things right. But forgiveness? That was another matter entirely. Maggie pressed the call button before she could change her mind. The phone rang 3 times before Jake answered. "Hello?" His voice was cautious, hopeful. "Jake, Maggie paused, gathering her thoughts. "I wanted to thank you for the money. It's going to help us get ahead." "I'm glad," he said softly. "You and Eli deserve that." The silence stretched between them, full of unspoken words. Maggie's grip tightened on the phone. She couldn't forget the past, but maybe she didn't have to let it poison the future. "I still need time," she said finally. "But maybe we can work something out, for Eli's sake." "That's all I'm asking for," Jake replied. "A chance to prove myself." Maggie ended the call, feeling both lighter and heavier. She had a plan now, for her finances, for Eli's future. The rest would have to wait. The rumble of motorcycle engines shattered the quiet evening. Maggie froze at her kitchen sink, soap suds dripping from her trembling hands. Through the window she watched as 5 motorcycles pulled up in front of her small house, their riders dismounting with practiced ease. "Eli," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "Go to your room and lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you to." Eli looked up from his homework at the kitchen table, his eyes wide with concern. "But Mom..." "Now, sweetie, please." The sound of heavy boots on her front porch made her heart race. When the first knock came, it was more of a pound that rattled the door in its frame. "We know you're in there," a gruff voice called out. "Just want to have a friendly chat about our old friend Jake." Maggie's hands shook as she reached for her phone. Jake answered on the first ring. "They're here," she whispered, pressing herself against the wall beside the window. "At my house." "Who's there?" Jake's voice was tight with tension. "Your old friends. 5 of them." Maggie peeked through the curtain. "The one with the snake tattoo on his neck is doing the talking." "Snake?" Jake cursed under his breath. "That's Victor. Listen to me carefully, Maggie. Don't open the door. Is Eli safe?" "In his room." The pounding on the door grew louder. "Jake, they're not leaving. What do they want?" "They want me to come back. To help with a job." Jake's voice hardened. But I'm done with that life. I won't run from them anymore. Maybe you should, Maggie found herself saying. Just until things cool down. No. The firmness in his voice surprised her. Running is what the old Jake would have done. I'm not that man anymore. I won't let them threaten my family. Family. The word hung in the air between them. I'm calling the police, Maggie said, her finger already hovering over the emergency dial. Don't. These men don't respect law enforcement. They respect strength. There was rustling on Jake's end of the line. I'm 10 minutes away. Just keep that door locked. The next few minutes felt like hours. Victor and his men continued their intimidation, their voices growing more threatening with each passing moment. Maggie stayed by the window, watching, her phone clutched to her chest like a lifeline. When Jake's truck roared into view, the atmosphere shifted. The bikers turned to face him, their postures tense but controlled. Jake stepped out, his face set in grim determination. Maggie cracked the window slightly, straining to hear. You're making a mistake, Jake, Victor was saying. The crew needs you. One last job, that's all we're asking. The answer's no. Jake's voice carried clearly across the yard. I've got something worth protecting now, something that matters more than any job. Is that right? Victor's laugh was ugly. The family man routine doesn't suit you, brother. You've got bad blood in you, same as us. Had, Jake corrected him. I've changed. And if you ever come near my family again, you'll what? Victor stepped closer, his hand moving toward his jacket. Jake didn't flinch. You know what I'm capable of, Vic. Don't make me prove it again. From her window, Maggie held her breath. Jake stood tall, his shoulders squared, facing down his past with unwavering resolve. This wasn't the same man who had abandoned her years ago. This was someone fighting for something more than himself. The tension crackled in the air like electricity. Victor's hand moved lightning fast, but Jake was faster. In one fluid motion, he blocked Victor's punch and countered with a swift strike that sent the gang leader stumbling backward. The other bikers surged forward, and the front yard erupted into chaos. Maggie watched in horror as Jake fought with a skill that spoke of years of violence. He moved with practiced precision, his fists connecting with brutal efficiency. One by one, the bikers fell back, bloodied and bruised. Even outnumbered, Jake held his ground, protecting her home, protecting them. Victor, nursing a bloody nose, spat on the ground. This ain't over, Jake, you know that. It is for me, Jake growled, his chest heaving. Spread the word, I'm done. And if anyone comes near my family again, what happened tonight will seem gentle in comparison. The bikers retreated to their motorcycles, engines roaring to life in angry protest. As their taillights disappeared into the darkness, Maggie's fear turned to rage. She yanked open the front door. How dare you? Her voice shook. How dare you bring this danger to my doorstep, to my son? Jake turned to her, his knuckles raw and bleeding. Maggie, No. She held up her hand. I don't want to hear it. You show up after 8 years thinking you can just walk back into our lives? And now this? She gestured to the scene of the fight. These men know where we live, Jake. They know about Eli. I'll protect you, Jake said, taking a step forward. Both of you. I swear. Protect us, Maggie laughed bitterly. The only thing we need protection from is you and your past. I've spent 8 years building a safe life for my son. 8 years, and in less than a month you've put everything at risk. Jake's face fell, the fight draining from his posture. I never meant for this to happen. I thought I could leave it all behind. But you can't, can you? Maggie wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening. Your past will always be there, always threatening to drag us down with you. Mom? Eli's small voice came from the doorway. Is everything okay? Maggie's heart clenched. "Go back inside, sweetie. Everything's fine." But Eli's eyes were fixed on Jake, wide with confusion and fear. "Dad, are you leaving?" Jake's composure cracked at the word Dad. He looked at Maggie, his eyes pleading. "Yes," Maggie said firmly, though her heart ached at the words. "Jake needs to leave, and he's not coming back. It's for the best, Eli." "But," Eli started, "inside. Now." Maggie's tone left no room for argument. As Eli disappeared back into the house, Jake stood there, defeated. The tough exterior he'd shown during the fight melted away, revealing the pain underneath. "I understand," he said softly. "You're right. I thought I could change, could be the father Eli deserves. But maybe some mistakes can't be fixed." He turned toward his truck, each step heavy with resignation. Maggie watched him go, her anger warring with the part of her that wanted to call him back. But the image of those violent men at her door, the fear in Eli's voice, it was too much. Jake paused at his truck door, looking back one last time. The streetlight caught the moisture in his eyes. Without another word, he climbed in and started the engine. Maggie stood rooted to the spot as his taillights grew smaller and smaller, until finally they disappeared into the night. The morning sun filtered through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the freshly mopped floor. Maggie moved between tables with practiced ease, her smile firmly in place despite the heaviness in her heart. 2 weeks had passed since Jake's departure, and life had settled into its familiar pattern. But something felt different. "Order up," called the cook from the kitchen. Maggie grabbed the plates, delivering them to a young couple who reminded her of simpler times. They thanked her with bright smiles, their hands intertwined on the table. She turned away quickly, pushing down the ache in her chest. During quiet moments, her eyes would drift to the counter where Jake had first sat. The memory of his weathered face and intense eyes lingered like a ghost. She'd catch herself wondering where he was, if he was safe, if he thought about them as much as they thought about him. At home, the changes were subtle but unmistakable. Eli's drawings, once filled with just the two of them, now featured a bearded figure standing beside them. He'd stopped asking about Jake directly, but Maggie could see the questions in his eyes every time the door opened at unexpected moments. One evening, as Maggie helped Eli with his homework at their small kitchen table, she noticed him staring at the empty chair where Jake had sat during their brief family dinners. "Mom," Eli said, his pencil pausing over his math worksheet. "Remember when Jake helped me with fractions?" Maggie's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. "Yes, honey." "He made it fun," Eli continued, his voice small but clear. "He said it was like fixing motorcycles. You need to know which parts make the whole thing work." The memory hit her hard. Jake's patient voice explaining fractions using motorcycle parts as examples, Eli's eyes lighting up with understanding, the proud smile on Jake's face when Eli got it right. She'd watched from the doorway, torn between gratitude and fear. That night, after tucking Eli in, Maggie found herself sorting through bills at the kitchen table. The envelope with Jake's money sat untouched in her drawer. She'd been too proud to use it, but now she wondered if her pride was worth the cost of working double shifts and missing precious time with Eli. The following morning, while making Eli's lunch, she found him sitting on the front steps, staring down the street. His Superman lunchbox lay forgotten beside him. "Eli, what are you doing out here, sweetheart? You'll be late for school." He turned to her, his young face serious. "Mom, will Jake ever come back?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with hope and uncertainty. Maggie sat down beside him, pulling him close. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves. "I don't know, honey," she answered honestly, her voice soft. "Sometimes grown-ups make complicated decisions that even they don't fully understand." But he changed, Eli insisted, looking up at her with those wise eyes that sometimes seemed too knowing for his age. He's not like the bad guys in my comics anymore. He's more like when Bruce Wayne decided to be Batman instead. Maggie couldn't help but smile at his comparison, even as her heart ached. You're right, sweetie. Jake has changed. She stroked his hair, remembering the way Jake had fought to protect them, the genuine remorse in his eyes, the gentle way he'd helped with homework. He's very different from the person I used to know. Eli leaned against her, silent for a moment. I miss him, Mom. I know, she whispered, holding him closer. I know you do. The mailbox creaked as Maggie pulled it open, her fingers brushing against the usual stack of bills and advertisements. But today, something different caught her eye. A thick, cream-colored envelope with her name written in familiar, blocky handwriting. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew that handwriting. Back inside her small kitchen, Maggie set her purse down and stared at the envelope for a long moment. Eli was at school, and the house was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator. With trembling fingers, she opened the letter. Dear Maggie, it began. The paper was high quality, nothing like the rushed note he'd left at the diner that first day. I hope this letter finds you and Eli well. I've spent these past weeks making good on my promise to leave my old life behind. The gang is no longer a part of who I am. I've sold my share in the club and used the money to start fresh. I've opened a legitimate motorcycle repair shop in Cedar Grove, about an hour from you. It's honest work, something I can be proud of. Something Eli could be proud of too someday. I know I brought danger to your doorstep, and for that, I'll never forgive myself. You and Eli deserve better than looking over your shoulders, wondering if my past will catch up with us again. That's why I had to leave. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to make things right first. The shop is doing well. I've hired 2 mechanics who needed second chances, just like me. We're building something good here, something that helps people instead of hurting them. I understand if you never want to see me again, I'll respect that choice, but if you're willing, I'd like to show you what I've built. Show you that I meant everything I said about changing. The door is always open for both you and Eli. There's an apartment above the shop. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and safe. If you ever decide to take a chance on me, there's room for a family here. I'm not asking for an answer right away. I just wanted you to know that I'm still here, still trying to be the man you and Eli deserve. Maggie set the letter down on her kitchen table, where sunlight streamed through the window and caught the edges of the paper. Her fingers traced over the return address. Bennett's Custom Repairs, 1247 Main Street, Cedar Grove. She picked up her phone, hesitated, then set it down again. The letter had included a business card with the shop's number, printed professionally with a simple logo. It looked legitimate, real. Walking to the window, Maggie watched the neighborhood kids playing on their bikes. She thought about Eli's face when he talked about Jake, about the way Jake had fought to protect them, about the genuine change she'd seen in him during those brief weeks together. Her reflection stared back at her from the window glass. Tired eyes, worry lines she couldn't quite hide anymore. But there was something else there too, a spark of hope she thought she'd lost. Maggie picked up her phone again, this time with steady hands. She needed to see for herself. One last time, she would give Jake a chance to prove himself. Not for her sake, but for Eli's. And maybe, just maybe, for all of them. She dialed the shop's number, listening to it ring. Whatever happened next, she knew she needed to hear Jake's story one more time, face to face. The repair shop stood modest but well-kept on the corner of Main Street, its fresh paint and clean windows a stark contrast to what Maggie had expected. A bell chimed as she pushed open the glass door, stepping into a waiting area that smelled of leather and coffee. 2 motorcycles gleamed in the showroom, their chrome surfaces catching the afternoon light. Through the large window into the workshop, she could see mechanics in navy uniforms working steadily, the sound of their tools muffled by the glass. "Be right with you," a familiar voice called from the back. Maggie's breath caught as Jake emerged, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. He looked different. His beard was neatly trimmed, his tattoos partially covered by a collared workshirt with "Bennett's Custom Repairs" embroidered on the pocket. The wild edge she remembered had been replaced by something steadier, more grounded. "Maggie," he said softly, stopping in his tracks. "You came." She nodded, unable to find words for a moment. "The place looks good," she managed finally. "Would you like a tour?" Jake asked, gesturing to a coffee maker in the corner. "Maybe some coffee first?" They sat in his small office, sunlight streaming through Venetian blinds. Certificates hung on the wall, business licenses, safety certifications, even a Chamber of Commerce membership. Everything legitimate, everything real. "I know it's not much," Jake said, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug. "But it's honest work. We help people here." "Tell me about it," Maggie said, and Jake's face lit up as he described his journey. How he'd used his mechanical skills to build something positive. How he'd hired 2 former inmates who needed a fresh start, just like him. How the local police chief had become a regular customer, bringing his Harley in for tune-ups. Hours passed as they talked. Jake showed her the workshop, introducing her to his employees who greeted her with respectful nods. He took her upstairs to see the apartment. Simple but clean, with a spare room he'd already painted in Eli's favorite color. "I'm not asking you to move in," he said quickly, seeing her expression. I wanted to be ready. If there was ever a chance." They ended up back in his office, the afternoon sun now lower in the sky. Jake pulled out a folder filled with bank statements, business plans, and letters of recommendation. "I want you to see everything," he said, spreading the papers on his desk. "No secrets, no surprises. This is who I am now." Maggie studied his face, the earnest eyes, the way his hands stayed steady as he showed her proof of his new life. This wasn't the same man who'd walked into her diner months ago. This was someone who'd fought his way back from the darkness, someone who'd built something real from the ashes of his past. "I can't promise anything," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "But I'm willing to try. Slowly. For Eli's sake. And maybe for mine too." The hope that bloomed in Jake's eyes was tempered with understanding. He nodded, careful not to push too hard. "That's all I'm asking for. A chance to prove myself, day by day." They sat in comfortable silence, the sounds of the repair shop humming around them, both knowing that while the road ahead might be long, they'd taken the first step together. The summer sun painted long shadows across the repair shop's parking lot as Jake locked up for the day. He'd promised to take Eli fishing, and nothing, not even a last-minute repair job, would make him break that promise. Maggie watched from her car as Jake jogged over, tool belt still hanging from his waist. "Sorry, just needed to finish Mrs. Henderson's bike," he said, sliding into the passenger seat. His clothes were clean, though, having changed from his work uniform into fresh jeans and a plain blue t-shirt. "You didn't have to rush," Maggie said softly, but she knew it meant everything to Eli that Jake kept his word. At home, Eli bounced around the living room, fishing rod in hand. "Can we go now? Please." His eyes sparkled with excitement as Jake checked the tackle box one last time. "All set, buddy." Jake's voice was gentle, patient. He helped Eli into his life jacket, double-checking the straps with careful attention. Maggie noticed how naturally they moved together now, the awkwardness of their early days long gone. At the lake, Jake showed Eli how to bait the hook, his large hands guiding Eli's smaller ones with tender care. "Easy does it," he said. "You want to be gentle just like this." Maggie sat on a nearby bench, pretending to read, but watching them instead. The afternoon light softened as Jake taught Eli to cast. When the line tangled, Jake didn't show frustration. He simply smiled, worked the knots free, and showed Eli again. And again, and again. "You're doing great," Jake encouraged, his voice carrying across the quiet water. "It took me weeks to get this good when I was your age." Eli beamed at the praise, his face glowing with pride. Maggie felt something shift in her chest, watching them together. This wasn't the intimidating man who'd walked into her diner months ago. This was someone who'd found his purpose in being a father. When Eli's line suddenly went taut, Jake didn't grab the rod. Instead, he coached from beside him, letting Eli reel in his first fish all by himself. "Keep the tip up," he called out. "You've got this." The small base broke the surface, and Eli squealed with delight. Jake helped him land it, showing him how to hold it properly for a photo before carefully releasing it back into the lake. "Did you see that?" Eli called out to Maggie, his face flushed with excitement. "Did you see what I caught?" "I saw, baby," Maggie answered, her heart full. "You did amazing." As the sun began to set, they packed up their gear. Eli was tired but happy, clutching his rod like a trophy. He looked up at Jake, his eyes bright with admiration. "Thanks for teaching me, Dad," he said simply, the word falling naturally from his lips for the first time. Jake froze for a moment, his eyes meeting Maggie's over Eli's head. She saw the emotion there, raw and real, the joy, the gratitude, the love. She felt tears prick at her own eyes, remembering all the nights she'd worried about Eli growing up without a father. But here they were, together. Not perfect, but growing, learning, becoming something more than they'd been before. Maggie watched as Jake knelt down to Eli's level, pulling him into a gentle hug, the fishing rod still between them. The repair shop flourished under Jake's steady hand. Each morning, Maggie would drive by on her way to work, watching the line of motorcycles grow longer outside the garage. Jake had built something real here, something honest and good. On her days off, she'd bring him lunch, watching him work. His movements were different now, more measured, more at peace. The wild energy that had once made her nervous had transformed into something steady and reliable. He'd roll out from under a bike, wiping grease from his hands, and his face would light up at the sight of her. "You didn't have to bring lunch," he'd say, but his eyes told a different story. "I wanted to," she'd reply, and mean it. The changes weren't just in his work. Jake showed up for every parent-teacher conference, helped Eli with his homework, and never missed a Little League game. He kept his promises, small ones and big ones alike. When the washing machine broke, he fixed it. When Eli needed new shoes, Jake took him shopping. The $5,000 he'd left that day in the diner seemed like a lifetime ago. One evening, as they sat on her small apartment balcony after Eli had gone to bed, Jake pulled out a folder filled with papers. "I've been saving," he said quietly. "The shop's doing well, and I've been putting money aside." Maggie looked at the bank statements. The careful budgeting, the methodical planning. This wasn't the impulsive man she'd known years ago. This was someone who thought about the future, their future. "I found a house," he continued, pulling out a listing. 3 bedrooms, good school district, big backyard for Eli. His voice was careful, measured. "It's just an idea. No pressure?" Maggie studied the photos. The house wasn't fancy, but it was solid. Real, like the life Jake was building for them. "I've been thinking about Eli's college fund too," Jake said, showing her another set of papers. I opened a savings account. Been putting in what I can each month. Maggie's throat tightened. She remembered all those nights she'd lain awake, wondering how she'd ever afford to send Eli to college. Now, looking at Jake's careful planning, she felt something shift inside her. "You really mean this," she said softly. "All of it." Jake set the papers aside and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused from honest work. "I know I can't erase the past," he said, "but I'm here now, for both of you, for as long as you'll have me." Maggie looked at their joined hands. The tattoos on his arms were fading now, like the memories of his old life. In their place were new marks, a grease stain from the shop, a small scratch from helping Eli build his science project. "I've been scared," she admitted. "Scared to trust, scared to hope." "I know," Jake said simply. "But you've changed. We've all changed." Jake squeezed her hand gently. "We can take it slow, one day at a time. Whatever you need." Maggie looked through the papers again. The house listing, the college fund, the careful plans for their future. Each page represented a promise, not just of words, but of actions, of change, of love. "Tell me more about the house," she said finally, and watched Jake's face light up with hope. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the park's grass as Maggie spread out a checkered blanket under an old oak tree. Eli darted between the playground equipment, his laughter carrying across the open space. Jake followed close behind, pretending to be a monster chasing him, his heavy boots leaving prints in the dewy grass. "Careful by the swings," Maggie called out, but her voice held more habit than worry now. She watched as Jake caught up to Eli, scooping him up and spinning him around. Their combined laughter echoed through the park. Maggie busied herself with unpacking their picnic basket. She'd made Jake's favorite sandwiches, turkey and Swiss with extra mustard, and packed Eli's preferred juice boxes. Simple things, but they felt special somehow, different from the rushed meals they used to have. "Mom, did you see how high Dad pushed me?" Eli called from the swings, his feet kicking toward the sky. The word Dad still made her heart skip, but now it was with joy rather than fear. Jake jogged back to the blanket, his face flushed from playing. "That kid's got more energy than a whole motorcycle rally," he said, dropping down beside her. His shoulder brushed against hers as he reached for a sandwich. "Wonder where he gets that from," Maggie teased, watching Jake take a big bite. "These are perfect," he said, giving her that smile that still made her stomach flutter. "Just like my mom used to make." Eli bounded over, flopping dramatically onto the blanket. His cheeks were red from running, his hair wild from the wind. "I'm starving." They ate together, trading stories and jokes. Jake told them about a classic Harley he was restoring at the shop, his eyes lighting up as he described the chrome work. Eli shared his plans for his upcoming science fair project, and Maggie felt her chest swell with pride when Jake offered to help build the display. A gentle breeze rustled through the oak leaves above them. Maggie leaned back, taking in the scene. Jake was showing Eli how to make grass whistles, their dark heads bent together in concentration. The sight struck her deeply. This was what peace felt like. "Got it," Eli exclaimed as he managed to produce a squeaky whistle. Jake high-fived him, pride written across his face. "You know what would be cool?" Eli said, lying back on the blanket. "If we could do this every weekend. Maybe even go camping sometime?" Jake glanced at Maggie, his expression hopeful but careful. "That sounds amazing, buddy. What do you think, Mags?" Maggie looked at her little family, at Jake's patient smile and Eli's eager face. The fear that had lived in her heart for so long had softened into something else, something warm and hopeful. "I think that sounds perfect," she said. "We could start planning for this summer. Really? Eli sat up straight, his eyes wide. Can we get a tent and everything? Of course, Jake said. I'll teach you how to build a proper campfire. Your mom and I used to camp all the time, remember? He looked at Maggie, his eyes gentle with shared memories. I remember, she said softly. Those days felt like another lifetime, before the mistakes, before the fear. But sitting here now, she realized those memories didn't hurt anymore. They were just part of their story. Jake reached over and squeezed her hand. This time will be better, he promised quietly. Everything we build from here on out, it's for keeps. Maggie squeezed back, watching Eli attempt another grass whistle. I know, she said, and meant it. Love had taken its time growing between them again, but here it was, strong and steady as the oak tree above them. The morning light streamed through the kitchen windows of their modest two-story home, casting warm shadows across the granite countertops Jake had installed himself. Maggie stood at the sink, washing dishes from breakfast, while the sounds of Eli getting ready for school echoed from upstairs. Mom, have you seen my science project folder? Eli called down, his footsteps thundering across the ceiling. Check the dining room table, Maggie answered, smiling as she dried her hands. The house still felt new after a year, but it was undeniably home. Pictures of their family lined the walls, Eli's birthday parties, weekend adventures, and quiet moments that made up their life together. Jake appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work in his mechanic's uniform, the name of his shop, Bennett's Custom Cycles, embroidered across the chest. He'd grown his business steadily over the past year, earning a reputation for honest work and fair prices. Found it, Eli announced, bounding down the stairs with his backpack and folder in hand. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his school uniform was crisp, such a change from the rushed mornings of their old apartment. Big presentation today, buddy? Jake asked, ruffling Eli's hair as he passed. Yeah, Mrs. Thompson says my project might win first place. Eli beamed, his excitement infectious. Did you know that some motorcycles can run on alternative fuel now? Learn something new every day, Jake chuckled, catching Maggie's eye with a proud smile. Their son's fascination with mechanics had grown alongside his relationship with Jake, leading to countless hours in the garage together. Maggie grabbed Eli's lunch from the counter, carefully packed with his favorites and a note tucked inside, just like her mother used to do for her. Here you go, sweetie. Remember, Jake's picking you up after school today. We're still going to look at those new bikes, right, Dad? Eli asked, bouncing on his toes. You bet, Jake promised, but homework comes first. Later that evening, Maggie pulled into their driveway after her shift at the restaurant she now managed. The lights were on inside, and through the window she could see Jake and Eli setting the table. Her heart swelled at the sight. Such a simple thing, but one she'd longed for during all those years alone. Inside, the house smelled of garlic and herbs. Jake had prepared his signature pasta dish, something he'd learned from his Italian grandmother. Eli was carefully placing napkins beside each plate, taking his time to fold them just right. Welcome home, Jake said, meeting her with a kiss. How was work? Good, Maggie replied, hanging up her coat. The new menu items are selling well. We might even expand the dinner service soon. They gathered around the table, the way they did every night now. Eli chatted excitedly about his science presentation, which had indeed won first place. Jake shared news about a vintage motorcycle he was restoring for a client. Maggie listened, taking in the comfortable rhythm they'd created together. Jake raised his glass of sparkling cider. They'd made it a tradition to celebrate even small victories. To my amazing family, he said, his voice warm with emotion. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, Maggie and Eli echoed, their glasses clinking together in the soft evening light. Eli added with a grin, "And to Dad's pasta sauce, even if it's not as good as Grandma Rosa's." They laughed together, the sound filling their home with joy. Maggie looked around at their little family, at Jake's gentle smile, at Eli's bright eyes, at the life they'd built together, and felt complete. The late afternoon sun painted golden streaks across their backyard as Maggie settled into the wooden porch swing. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine from the garden she and Eli had planted in the spring. In front of her, Jake and Eli were tossing a football back and forth, their movements easy and natural, like they'd been doing this forever instead of just a year. "Go long, buddy," Jake called out, his voice full of enthusiasm. Eli took off running, his sneakers kicking up tiny puffs of grass as he sprinted across the yard. Maggie wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, letting its warmth seep into her fingers. The ceramic was smooth and familiar, a Mother's Day gift from Eli, decorated with his handprints and a wobbly heart. She watched as Jake pretended to fumble the ball, making Eli laugh so hard he had to stop running. "Did you see that, Mom?" Eli shouted, waving the football triumphantly after making a particularly good catch. "Dad's teaching me how to spiral." "I see you, sweetie," she called back, her heart swelling at the way Eli's face lit up when he said Dad. It wasn't just a word anymore. It was filled with trust and love and belonging. Jake jogged over to where Eli stood, giving him a high five that echoed across the yard. His tattoos, once symbols of a darker past, now seemed to tell a different story. The same strong arms that had once inspired fear in others were now gentle, lifting Eli onto his shoulders with practiced ease. The sound of their laughter mixed with the chirping of birds and the distant hum of lawnmowers from neighboring yards. It was the soundtrack of suburban life, so different from the cramped apartment where she and Eli had spent their early years together. Back then, she'd been too focused on survival to dream about moments like this. Maggie watched as Jake showed Eli how to properly grip the football, his patience evident in every careful explanation. She remembered how nervous she'd been about letting Jake into their lives, how she'd questioned every decision, analyzed every interaction. Now, seeing them together, those fears felt like distant memories. "Mom, come play with us," Eli called out, his cheeks flushed with excitement. Jake turned toward her, adding his own encouraging smile. "Yeah, come on, Mags. Show us what you've got." Setting her coffee aside, Maggie stood up and walked down the porch steps. The grass was cool beneath her bare feet, and the evening air was perfect. Not too hot, not too cold. Just right, like so many things in their life had become. They formed a triangle in the yard, passing the ball between them. Eli's aim wasn't perfect, but Jake and Maggie made a show of diving for his throws anyway, causing him to dissolve into fits of giggles. When Jake missed a catch and ended up sprawled in the grass, Eli flopped down beside him, and soon they were both pointing out shapes in the clouds drifting overhead. Maggie stood watching them, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The sunlight was starting to soften into evening gold, casting long shadows across their yard. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined this scene. Her son and his father, together and happy, their past hurts healing into something beautiful. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and orange, Maggie felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. They had weathered storms together, faced down fears, and emerged stronger. Their love had grown from uncertainty into something steady and true, a foundation for all the possibilities that lay ahead. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.